Well, good morning, guys. And ladies. Sorry about that. It's July 18th, Sunday. I'm out here on Lake Talcon today. This morning, what I wanted to do is I had quite a few people ask me about my setup, what I'm using, my tackle that I'm using. So I thought I'd take a minute this morning and just kind of go through my tackle. And let's start out with the rods that I use. So I currently own two of each one of these setups, and one is a ACC Crappie stick in a 10-footer, and the other is a Sam Super Sensitive in a 10-footer. And I tell you guys, of the two, the Sam Super Sensitive is a lighter weight rod. It's probably it's noticeably lighter than the ACC Crappie stick. But it is a little more flimsy. It's got a fair amount of stiffness to it, but it's got a little bit softer of a tip and a little less backbone than this ACC Crappie stick. This ACC Crappie stick is a little stiffer. It's got a little bit more weight to it. Because of that, I've got a little bit larger reel on it, and that is just to help balance out that tip weight, to try to get some of that weight on the back end of the rod so that the tip's light. This one I have a smaller reel on, and it seems to balance about the same as that ACC Crappie stick, but just overall it ends up making just a slightly lighter rod and reel setup than the ACC. So this particular rod, I bought a Piscafun Viper X in the 1000 model. And so far, so good. It's a very inexpensive reel. You can get these off of Amazon. I just needed a lightweight reel. I'm not really making long casts. I'm just doing underhanded pitches, and I've got two of these, and I've had them since I guess last winter. And so far they are holding up okay. I did notice that I'm starting to get a little bit of sticking in one of them right when you start to turn the reel handle. Sometimes it sticks just a little bit, so I haven't taken it apart to see how these are made yet, but maybe here in the next few weeks I'll get around to disassembling the one I've got and see what might be causing that little bit of stick. I know I used to have Shimano reels years ago that had a rubber washer in them for the spool, for the to control, I think it controlled the reverse on the spool, and that rubber washer would swell and it would cause that sticking. So I don't know if they built these that way. I have to take one apart and take a look at it and see. But overall, for an inexpensive reel to catch crappie, it's done okay. Now on my ACC Crappie stick, I actually have a Fluger on this one. This is a Fluger President, and I have used Fluger spinning reels I don't know, for a long time. And guys, these are just good reels. I've probably got 6 or 7 of them in between my bass tackle and my lightweight spinning rods and saltwater rods, and honestly I haven't had one fail. I mean, I've used them and abused them and caught hundreds and hundreds of redfish and mackerel and bass and just everything that swims with these Fluger President reels, and they've just been great reels. That's probably one of my favorite spinning reels made. This is the what size is this one? This is the 6730, and this reel actually came off of a spinning reel that I was using in the ocean to catch trout and redfish. And I've actually got 2 of these, and the other one's on my other ACC Crappie stick. And I don't know, I just can't say enough good stuff about Fluger, these Fluger spinning reels. They've just been great reels. I really haven't had a single one break. Haven't had a problem with one. Haven't had anything get sticky, or I've used them in salt water for years and the salt hasn't got to them. All in all, I would say if you want to invest in a spinning reel, they're going to cost a little bit more than something like this. But if you want one that's just going to last a long time, my experience with these Fluger reels is they've just been awesome. I mean, I really have not had any problem with them. They've just been awesome reels. And I don't know if they still do, but years ago they used to always come with an extra spool, which was really nice, because I could have braid spooled up on one spool, and I could have mono spooled up on another spool, and if I needed to change out for whatever reason, it was just a simple matter of taking the spool off and putting another spool on, and you had another set of line. Now, the way I have these, the way I rig up my crappie rods is, you know, when I started out doing this, I started out using, and sorry guys, it is hot as blazes out here this morning, humid. So I started out using mono, 6-pound test mono, and it worked okay. But I tell you, I learned really quick that it was, most of the time I could not feel the fish bite the jig. I mean, I could see them bite it on the live scope. You know, eventually I would feel that little bit of pressure on there and know that the fish was on it as I was working it, you know, and I caught fish with it just fine. That, you know, that mono casts really good. It's really soft, and you know, I hear a lot of people say that braid is cast better, and I don't find that to be true, guys. I find that my mono, the super lightweight mono, typically casts better than the braid for me. I think you get a little bit of friction from the roughness of the braid, and you know, it tends to stick to itself on the spool a little bit, so I don't get quite as good at casting, but I do rig my crappie rods. I've got to where they are all rigged with 10-pound test braid. Now I have on these, I have the spider wire, I think they called it translucent. It was the clear, it's kind of a white color. It has been an okay line. I haven't compared it to a lot of other braids. Really, this is the first one in this line of line that I've used. When I first got it and put it on the spools, it seemed to be a little sticky, like maybe they had it waxed or something, and it would tend to stick to the line and cast a little bit poorly right at first. But you know, I've used it for a little while now, and now it just pretty much feels like every braid I've ever used, and it does okay. You know, usually when I get out on the lake, first thing I do is take my jig off and make a long cast, and you know, loosen that braid up on that spool a little bit from any fish that I may have caught that may have tightened that down, which is going to make it stick a little bit on the first few casts. So that's what I use. I use 10-pound test braid, and the reason I do that, guys, is because it didn't take me long to figure out that you can feel them bite it on the braid. With that braided line, you will feel that tap when they hit it. And a lot of these fish that I'm catching are hitting these baits when I jig them, and it's sinking. So there, it is falling on a slack line, and that's when they're hitting it. And more times than not, I feel them bite it on that braid, and I just couldn't do that with the mono. I just would not feel those fish. You know, really, I think that is the #1 reason why I like using that braid. Now, what I do, some people don't, but I like to do it. I don't know, maybe it just makes me feel better, I don't know, but I use 10-pound test fluorocarbon tied to my braid, and I'll typically tie, you know, this one's kind of short because we fished all day yesterday, and you know, the guys got hung a lot, so they you know, they broke it off a few times. But I will typically tie about a 4-foot piece of 10-pound test braid just using a uni to uni knot. That's not the greatest knot in the world for braid to mono to fluorocarbon leader, but for crappie fishing it works just fine. Most of the time, if I use a steady pull, I can bend a crappie hook on these jigs with this 10-pound braid and this 10-pound fluorocarbon. I can straighten that hook out enough to get it off the stump without losing all my jigs. So that works about, I don't know, half the time. So, you know, I'm saving half my jigs, you know, half as many jigs are getting lost to stumps. And you know, guys, if you crappie fish, you're gonna catch a lot of stumps because that's where they live. They're gonna be down in trees, and they love to get in horizontal oriented timber. So anything that's horizontal underwater, they get under that. They've got shade under that, and you know, you're trying to get a jig down under that stuff, and you're just going to get hung quite a bit. And you know, yesterday the guys are, you know, they don't crappie fish very much, so we ended up going to some crappie jigs that have a little bit of a weedless guard on them, try to keep them from getting hung quite as much, and that helps a little bit. You can still get hung, obviously, and you know, I think that you probably drop your percentage of fish caught by a little bit. You know, if you use them quite a bit and you get used to them, you get pretty good at setting the hook and you know, not losing many fish. But I do believe that I catch a few more fish without that weed guard on there, and And guys, I'll take a pair of scissors if you buy these online. If you find some, I like the fiber weed guards. I don't buy anything with metal weed guards. I like the little plastic ones like you'd get on a living rubber jig for bass. And then I take a pair of scissors and I trim those things down until I just get down to, I don't know, this one's only got 4 strands left on it. Just enough that if I feel a stump, I can pull it real slow and pull it over that stump without hooking it. But if you put any pressure on it whatsoever, it mashes down. That way I can hook those crappie without that weed guard causing a problem and me missing those fish. Now, you know, it will cause me to get hung a little bit more than normal, but it's still better than no weed guard at all. And I have found that to work pretty good. And at times I have caught all the crappie that I caught all day using a jig with a weed guard. I've got 4 rods, 2 of the Sam Super Sensitive and 2 of the ACC crappie sticks. And a lot of times those ACC crappie sticks, since they got a little more backbone, they're a little bit stiffer, I will usually leave them rigged up with a bait with a weed guard. And guys, I also trim my weed guards off shorter to where they just come up far enough to cover up that hook. But I'll trim those off and I'll keep these ACC crappie sticks. If I'm going to be down in some heavy cover trying to get those fish out of heavy cover and they're bigger size crappie, I will usually use these ACC crappie sticks for that because they just got a little bit more backbone. I got a little bit more control over those fish. If I hook a big fish down in that stuff, I can get him up out of there and be able to manage that fish just a little bit better with this stiffer rod with a little bit more backbone. And that's that ACC 10-foot. Now that's kind of it for my rod setup. So let me show you some of the tackle that I use. I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is all of my crappie tackle. So I have 2 boxes of hand-tied jigs. You know, you guys see me tie my own jigs. And I have these set up mostly by weight. So these are double-sided region tackle boxes that I ordered off of Amazon. Nothing special about them. They just look like they would fill the need. They work great for my hand-tied jigs. You know, I will say that the latches aren't the greatest, but they get the job done. And what I do is I keep 1 box. I have this one full of 1/8 ounce jig heads. So that's my typical go-to weight in the summertime is 1/8 ounce. And most of the time these fish in the summertime, you typically get a thermocline that sets up in the lake, and the fish are typically not going to be in these reservoirs that will get a thermocline like this lake. You know, I'm not so much on Seminole. I don't see it as much out on Seminole. They tend to be a little bit deeper on Seminole than they do on Talquin. But on Talquin, a lot of times we get kind of a thermocline, and unless the water gets really clear, I'm usually finding these fish in less, 15 foot or less. And an 1/8 ounce jig will get down to that depth. I can see it on my live scope. You can't see it great on a live scope, but you can see it good enough to get glimpses of it and know you got it in the strike zone of the fish. And that's the important thing, you know, is getting that jig down to the right level so that you're in the strike zone of those fish. You don't always have to see your jig. It's always nice if you can see it on the way down so that you can get it in the right level. And if you can get a glimpse of it every now and then to know you're keeping it at those fish's level, you know, that'll help you out tremendously. And then obviously that live scope lets you get lined up on your cast so you know you're getting that bait to where the fish are. But these are my 1/8 ounce jigs. On one side, hand tied. I tie them in various colors. I tend to like the chartreuse colors, and sometimes some days I have pretty good luck on some of the dark colors or the bright colors, just depending on water quality. You know, if we get right now we've got, I would say, pretty good visibility out here on Lake Talquin. And when I was on Seminole the other day, the visibility was really good on that lake. And typically if the water, you know, if I've got 2 foot of visibility on the lake, I'm probably going to lean more toward natural colors. The chartreuse and natural green colors, the natural shad colors. And what we saw yesterday out here fishing was most of the fish we caught, we did catch on a little more natural, lighter shad colors. So this side I keep my 1/16 ounce jigs. You guys will see I don't have very many 1/16 ounce because I just don't fish with that lighted jig. Now I tie these up if I happen to get up in shallow water fishing for spawning crappie. I've got some really lightweight jigs that I can use, but I found that I just hardly ever use less than 1/8 ounce. That's just not something I use. Now this is a little mix here, and what these are actually some that I tied that have weed guards on them. So when I'm fishing with hair jigs and I'm fishing in some heavy cover, you know, standing timber or something where I'm just gonna get hung a lot, I will go to these hand tied jigs with the weed guard. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but that's just one of my little hand tied jigs. And you know, guys, if you watched my hand tied jig video, I use craft fur for my jigs. I think that craft fur is awesome. You guys can see that blowing in the wind. It's very soft, very light. It's almost very close to what marabou is, but it's just a lot tougher. It just lasts longer. It's just easy to work with. You can get it in sheets, make a bunch of jigs out of one piece of it. It's, you know, it's just, to me, I just found that that's just a great way to make a crappie jig. So that's one of my hand tied fly boxes. The other one is my box that I use mostly in the winter time. Now, in the winter time, these fish are going to leave these edges of these channels and these flats and these places where they're schooled up in big schools. At some point, you're going to get some cold snaps in the winter, and that water temperature is going to get just right, and those fish are going to vanish on you. You're going to go, where in the world did the crappie go? Well, guys, I'm going to tell you where they go. They go out into the river channel. They disperse, they spread out, the schools bust up, and they go out into the river channels. They start making their way into those river channels and out into open water, and they spread out and they suspend anywhere from 5 foot down to 20 foot. That thermocline usually goes away, lake turns over, and those shad all pile out into the lake, into the river channel, and those crappie just go out there and roam and eat shad. And that's when you start sniping crappie out in open water. So that's a different kind of fishing. And when I'm doing that, a lot of times these crappie will be down, you know, 15, sometimes even 20 feet deep, and a lot of times they're up near the surface. But when that happens, you don't have a particular spot that you're spot locking the boat on. You're just easing around real slow into the wind, try not to make much noise, and you're looking for those crappie suspended out there in the water column. And then you've got to make a cast to them. They may be moving, the boat's going to be moving. So at that time of the year, I go to my favorite size jig head is a 3/16. They're a little harder to find, 3/16 ounce. I don't know why, but for some reason you just don't see as many crappie jigs made in 3/16 ounce. But that is my weight. That's what I prefer. Is that gives me a good cast. I can pick the jig up on the live scope pretty good, and it'll get down to the fish quickly. Not too fast, but quick enough I can get it down there to them before the boat swings off of them or the fish move out of view. I can just get it down there a little bit quicker without having too much weight, because I don't like to have a lot of weight on my crappie jig. And I'm not vertical jigging them. I'm pitching to most of the fish that I'm catching. I'm throwing the jig to the fish out there. I keep my live scope set around 34 feet in front of the boat. That seems to be about as far as I can do an underhand pitch with my rod, and that works good for me. And as long as I'm seeing fish, I'm going to keep it about that range. Now, if I'm having a hard time finding fish, I may push it on out to see if I can locate them, but I'll bring it back in when I'm working, when I'm trying to actually actively catch them. Then that's where my range is going to be, because I've just personally learned about how far that is in front of my boat, so I got a good feel for where that fish is just at a glance by looking at my screen. But that's my 3/16 ounce jigs. I have a few 1/4 ounce jigs. These are actually rigged up with rabbit fur. They're just a little heavier, tougher jig, and if I ever get into situations where I'm trying to catch fish, you know, that are down there 20+ feet deep, sometimes I will pick up these 1/4 ounce jig heads to get that bait down there a lot quicker, get it down to the fish where I can catch them. And you know, that's worked pretty good. I keep a few of these tied up in my jig box. So this is my jig head box. This is all my terminal tackle for crappie fishing. I've got a little bit of everything in here because I just tend to buy everything I see to get it in my hands and look at it, and you know, and determine whether or not I like it. And I'll show you guys my go-to crappie jig head. This is the one I use 90% of the time. It's just a plain old eagle claw ball head jig in an 1/8 ounce. The model number is WBH 18-4 because this is black, so part of that means the color, I believe. But these jigs, the reason I use these jigs is they have a pretty good size hook on them. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's a pretty good size hook on these jigs. You know, it sticks back quite a ways. There's a pretty big gap in there, and that hook's a, you know, I don't know, a number 1, number 2 hook, pretty good size hook. And the reason I do that is because, you know, down here where I'm fishing, the lakes, I'm lucky to have some lakes here that have, you know, exceptional size crappie in them. We've got, you know, some of the biggest crappie within a, you know, several hundred miles around here until you start getting over towards Mississippi and, you know, in that area where they have those big white crappie and stuff on Grenada Lake and that kind of places. I'm lucky that I've got one of the lakes that has, you know, really stud crappie in it right here by the house. So I'm fishing for pretty good sized crappie most of the time, and I want something that has a sure enough hook on it. I want something with a nice big gap in it that is going to stick that fish every time. I do not like little tiny hooks. I tend to miss a lot of fish with little small hooks. I have a lot of fish that pull off with little small hooks. That hook, I catch them almost every time. It is, unless I just barely catch him in the edge of the lip because he just didn't have in his mouth good, most of the time I don't have any problem at all with crappie getting off. I might lose 1 or 2 a day. Some days I don't lose any at all. And you know, I'm a bass fisherman, saltwater fisherman, and if you guys watch, I set the hook on the crappie, and there's none of this little playing around. When they hit my bait, I'm sticking them, and I mean, I'm sticking them good. And most of the times I have a hard time getting the hook out of their mouth. It is buried in the top of their head, and it is hard to get it out. But that is my favorite jig head. I'll use that in an 1/8 ounce pretty much 90% of the time all summer long. Now I have piles and piles and piles of other jigs in here, but let me see if I can find my go-to in the wintertime. All right, here's a potpourri of them. So guys, these are made by Jan's Netcraft lure making company. You guys may have seen them on the internet. I don't know that this is the Dominator series, guys. You know, I stuck them all in one package to save space in my tackle box. I'd have to look. They sell them as just their round head jigs. And this one has that same size hook, that nice long hook with a big gap. Good size hook. I can use a good size bait on this. The only thing is different is that I upsize to a 3/16 in the wintertime so that I get a little bit quicker fall on these baits. Now I will say this, one thing I have noticed about Jan's Craft round head jigs is they are all over the board with weight. I weighed a bunch of them, and there's very poor consistency with the actual weight of the jig. Some of them may be 3/16, but they're just kind of all over the board. You kind of just get about that weight, which is fine. It still works just fine. But that is the same hook that is used in that Eagle Claw jig head, and if I get hung on a stump, I can straighten that hook out and get it off. But otherwise, it is stiff enough that I can lift a 2 or 3 pound crappie up out of the water and he's not going to bend that hook. So that is, and this is also the jig head that I use to tie up all of my hair jigs for wintertime fishing. Now when I get down to smaller size baits, I'll show you guys what I typically am using these jigs on. Now I have come to find that this particular jig in a plastic right now is my favorite. You know, that could change next week when I'm catching a fool out of them on some other jig, but day in and day out, I will almost always have one of these tied on. This is a Bobby Garland Slab Doctor. That's what this is, and I like the profile of that bait. It's got a pretty good size. It's got a pretty good body on it. I can get a big hook in that. So I'm using those bigger hooks. That hook's going to come all the way to the back of that rubber. Got some nice little legs on it with some little paddle tails, so it's got good action. And a lot of the times in this time of year, I'm actually jigging that bait. I'm letting it sink down into the top of that crappie school, and I am hopping it up out of them and letting it fall back and hopping it. And I just find that has a good fall rate. It's got a nice profile, and the fish that I catch on that, they typically just completely engulf it. They really eat the bait. See, now I've got a lot of other jig heads that I'll use at different times. There's some VMC, they're pretty nice jig heads, and you know, they just make an assortment of them. I will use just a standard ball head jig with a weed guard. And you guys heard me talking about that earlier. If I'm fishing in a bunch of standing timber where there's, you know, there's not a foot between every tree and I'm just always casting in the timber, I will trim the weed guards down on these things and go with one that has a little bit of a fiber weed guard. I will trim it down to where it moves very easy, but I will do that just to keep from getting hung every cast. And you know, typically I have to set the hook just a little bit harder to make sure I stick those fish, but it'll still catch them. And that's really it. You guys can see I've got a 1,000 different jigs. I've got some with the oh gosh, I think they call them sickle hooks, the ones that have the bend in them. I've got some of those, and you know, guys, it's just my opinion. It may not be yours, and you know, everybody's got their own opinion of what works for them. I tend to get a little hard-headed with preconceived notions at sometimes. I don't use these, and let me show you why I don't use them. It's not because I don't think they work, and it's not because, you know, they're not good hooks. They can be a little tougher to bend when you get them hung up, so they're going to tend to bend a little bit more. But I don't know if you can see this or not, but if you can see the point of the hook on that thing, if you look close, that hook tip is bent down. I do not want my hook tip bent down. If anything, I want that thing sticking up. I want that to grab the inside of that crappie's mouth when I set the hook. I do not want it to rub across there and not get hung. So if I do use these, I will typically take a pair of pliers and I will grab that thing and I will bend it up enough that that hook point is sticking more up where it can grab the inside of that fish's mouth. And that's just my opinion. I don't know if it's true 100%, but you know, I'm trying to catch fish and I'm not taking the chance that I'm missing fish because that is going to drag through the top of his mouth and not catch anything but just a tiny little bit of skin that's going to pull off, or not hook him at all because that tip of that hook being bent down. You can see I have an entire bag, an entire box, just packed slam full of about every Bobby Garland bait made that I thought looked like it might catch a crappie. And I will cycle through them at different times and use different ones and try different colors. But you know, day in and day out, that one I showed you has been my favorite. I just love the profile and the size of the slab doctor. The fish bite it real good. It's just, you know, it's a good size bait for good size fish, and I catch a lot of fish on it. Now I will say this, they're soft baits. So these Bobby Garland baits are soft baits, and you will tear a lot of them up. So you're going to go through a lot of those baits fishing. Now I have another box of tackle that I will use at different times of the year. It has all kind of other crappie jigs in it. I really like the panfish assassins. In the winter time, if I want a smaller bait, and even in the summertime, when I'm fishing with 1/8 ounce or less, these little bass assassins in different colors, they make them in a bunch of different colors. 2 inches, the 2-inch size panfish assassin. I think I called them bass assassins. They got a nice thick body on them. The hook stays in them pretty good, and they just catch a lot of fish for me. I have a lot of good luck on those, so that's been a favorite of mine. I have tried Mr. Twister grubs in a little bit bigger shad size. I have tried these several times because it just looks like that's what these crappie are feeding on naturally. It looks like that would catch them, but in the lakes down here that I'm fishing, that has not worked for me. So you know, if you guys thinking about trying it, maybe you have better luck, but I thought I would catch them on that, and I do have a few fish hit them, but I have a very poor hookup ratio. It's like they are not engulfing these baits, and they just may be just a little too big. And that's kind of what I have. If you guys have any other questions about what I do, just drop me an email and I'll answer you. And I think what I'm going to do the rest of the day is I'm going to put my top up and I'm going to get out here on this lake, and I'm just going to ride around and look for fish and enjoy being on the water. I don't even know if I'll fish any, but I'll take the camera with me, guys, and maybe we'll get a little bit of side scan footage. I have quite a people ask me about side scan, in finding these fish with side scan. Keep in mind, if you want to learn, please drop me an email. I'll be glad to take you out and teach you how to use electronics and how to find this. Obviously, there's some cost involved in that. You got to have the setup. Or I'll take you out in my boat and show you in my boat. You can get your setup when you want to and learn how to do it yourself. I will go out in your boat if you would like me to and do that. So just give me an email if you're interested in that. And I may have to split this video up into 2 parts. It's looking like I've talked for quite a while, so this might be a pretty long video. So we'll see how that goes. But I appreciate it, guys. I appreciate everybody that's watching. My subscribers are growing. I wish you guys would subscribe and like my videos. Feel free to comment. And guys, I've had some people come up to me, on the water that I knew I could recognize that they recognize me. If you see me out on the water, guys, come up and talk to me. You're not going to mess up my fishing. I got plenty of places to fish. Just come on up, approach the back of my boat. You don't come right up in front of where I'm fishing, but come up to me and say hello and chat with me. Feel free. You're not going to bother me. You're not going to bother my fishing. I'm not going to bite. I get on the water plenty. I enjoy talking to folks. So come up and talk to me if you get the chance. All right. Have a great day. Have a great day, guys. I'm going to see if I can get a little footage of this side scan and find some more fish.